Hello, everyone. Are we live?
I believe we are.
Yes. Awesome. Thank you so much for joining the webinar. My name is Caio. I'll be your moderator today. I'm here with Alia and Clarinda. Yeah, I'll let both of them introduce themselves.
Wonderful. I'll go first. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on this AML Watcher webinar. It would be great for us to know where you're all joining from around the world. So please do use the chat bot to communicate with us and also raise questions. I'm a compliance officer. I've been in the regulatory compliance and financial crime compliance space for too long. And I very much work in the second line, so that would be your compliance oversight and advisory function. A lot of my experience has been in traditional banking, but also fintech and payment services, which is the space I'm currently in now.
Hi, everybody. Nice to see all of you today. My name is Clarinda Woodford. I'm a director at Beyond FS. We are a boutique financial crime consultancy based in London. And my role in particular is working with payments and fintech space to solve all sorts of complex financial crime challenges. I've been a career consultant for, I guess, the last 13, 14 years. Primarily, I started out doing work predominantly with the banking sector, both retail and investment banking. But the last 3 to 4 years, that focus has very much shifted into the payments and fintech space. So most of my clients now tend to be authorized electronic money institutions and payment institutions who are authorized in the UK by the FCA, but usually have presence across the globe as well. I'm delighted to be here.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Clarinda. Well, let's kick this off. The main topic that we have for today's discussion is Agentic AML, identifying hidden risks and eliminating false positives, right? So let's start by understanding why this is a bottleneck, why false positives can be a bottleneck to compliance teams and to different organizations around the globe. Do you have any thoughts about this, Clarinda?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think from my perspective, I'm always keen for a good statistic to quantify a problem. And a few months ago, I saw a really interesting article by ComplyAdvantage, so one of the tech vendors who are pretty active in this space. And one of their reports that they published on this topic basically said that over 90% of alerts are actually identified as false positives in the end. So only really 10% are going on to be either potential matches or true matches. But the vast majority, as we all know as compliance professionals, are dispositioned as false positives and don't need further action. But what was really interesting from this ComplyAdvantage report that I was reading was that they estimated that dealing with all these false positives cost institutions in general and collectively around $100 billion of wasted effort every year. And for me, that was a really shocking statistic, and I guess for me really helps to quantify the issue pretty nicely. Alia, I'm sure you have some thoughts on that as well in terms of the extent of the problem.
Yeah, certainly. I really like the way you gave the figure on costs being wasted that ComplyAdvantage reported. I found a statistic from McKinsey that talks about kind of the global financial crime market and how much firms are spending globally, and it's around 213 billion annually. So looking at, hearing what you've just said, half of that money is essentially being wasted for a multitude of reasons that we'll get into, but a lot of it is those false positive noisy alerts that are being generated.
Awesome. And when we talk about like the cost involved with false positives, we're not talking about just about money, right? We're talking about like operational inefficiency in a sense. Like, are there any other costs involved in false positives?
Yeah, so I kind of I look at the kind of volumes of false positives working within firms. I think about the hidden risks. We talk about kind of the inefficiencies and costs being wasted, but actually operationally, it can be very demoralizing for an individual or an analyst that is performing the task of going through false positives. So the risks I've seen are, well, number one, it's analyst fatigue, cognitive fatigue. They essentially, the role becomes a tick box exercise, and ironically, you're doing what a machine could do. And we're going to speak about agentic AI. It's also demoralizing, so you don't feel like you're achieving anything. The second risk is also inconsistent decision making. So when it does come to compliance oversight, when it comes to having to report to the regulators or respond to regulators, if the decisioning for closing an alert as a false positive or missing true positive alerts is not consistent, or there's no kind of evidence that actually a decision was made and a rationale added to the alert, that just means there's no auditability. So there's no trust in the actual process itself. And then finally, the more alerts you have, the likelihood is that you're actually missing those true positives, because those alerts are buried under the mountain of false positive alerts.
Yeah, I completely agree as well. And in my experience, and especially working with the payments and fintech sector, where perhaps compliance teams are more lean than in the banking sector, and there are fewer resources, individuals are expected to double, if not triple hat. And this really means that actually compliance personnel kind of end up playing a bit of a game of whack-a-mole when it comes to dealing with these very manual, very operational BAU tasks. They're firefighting. And that means there's a limited bandwidth and a limited capacity to actually be able to spend working on the strategic initiatives and bettering the business and progressing, which is obviously something that people want to be focusing on, and that there's a desire to, and obviously pressure from senior management to do so. But actually, you've got these competing priorities of everything flashing red and flashing as urgent, and there's fires that need to be fought. And it really takes you away from doing some of those kind of longer term strategic focus activities. It's very much focused in the here and now. And that leads to exactly that fatigue that Alio was mentioning before.
Awesome. Thank you for your insights here. I just want to comment to our audience. Please, guys, drop your questions in the chat. I'll be happy to address them during our conversation here. I think it's more engaging and more productive than having a Q&A session at the end. So please feel free to drop your questions in the chat, right? Moving forward, I would like to discuss how traditional compliance methods aren't really enough nowadays, right? Because we live in a world where regulations are popping out like everywhere, and we do have a lot of fraud, new types of fraud coming in, and like we are always and constantly running against like these fraudsters, right? They're very creative, and there are like many types of frauds coming in, right? So we definitely need to be ahead of them in some way. And I do not believe that the traditional way and doing this manually is still, how can I say it? It's still feasible in a sense that if you're in a company that is trying to scale, and right now we do have a lot of fintechs that scale fast, and they need to do it in a safe way, right? So why do you guys think that these traditional ways of doing compliance is not enough? And like, why doing this manually with like all the volume and complexity of new regulations can be changed, Do you have any insights about this, Clorinda? Let me address that to you first.
Yeah, for sure. I can jump in here. I mean, look, let's face it. If you're a criminal or a fraudster, you're not stupid. Like these bad actors know, and they know very well that our financial crime compliance teams, whether it's in a bank, whether it's in a payments firm, whether it's in any other regulated entity, are super bogged down with these low priority alerts. And so the fact that these compliance people are having to deal with thousands of them, if you're a criminal or a fraudster, is wonderful, because you're sitting there probably giggling away thinking, this is brilliant. These people are never going to actually get into delving into my activity because they've got all this noise that's standing in their way and causing diversions and taking up their time and causing them to fatigue mentally. But actually, the chances of me getting away with it and going undetected are probably quite high. And we know that through just the sheer volume of illicit activity that doesn't get caught. So that as a number one is a massive issue that sort of shows that these manual processes and the current way or historic way of doing things just isn't working, because it's just not fully solving the problem. We've still got swathes of criminal activity happening and slipping through the cracks. But also from a sort of systems and tooling perspective, it's really important to think about how we actually design and implement traditional rules and thresholds, because they are by virtue put in at a point in time to address a particular typology, to look at a particular set of behaviors that has happened in a backward-looking sense. Now, those rules and thresholds may be good at day one, but they decay over time. They become less relevant, they become less viable. And often firms will just add and bolt on rule after rule after rule, which just increases capacity. There's limited governance over it. It becomes a bit of a sporadic mess. And perhaps there's not that ability to continually assess your rules, sort of simplify and optimize them, which ultimately is just leaving bigger gaps for criminals to get through. Alia, I'm sure you also have thoughts on that as well.
Klinder, is actually something I read that you posted maybe this week, but you talked about people, process, technology, and it's what you're talking about right now as well. You know, the landscape of compliance is so rapidly changing and evolving, and these fintechs are coming into a really highly regulated space, but a fast moving space that, like Klinder said, the technology needs to keep up. The processes then need to be very streamlined and scalable to fit in with the technology. But then I'm going to kind of discuss the point of people. I think the kind of skill set needed now in the compliance function and a risk function is evolving and changed. You know, the kind of traditional, the theory of regulations, or, the theory of law, it's not enough to then put that into practice and execute and implement. Like skills such as analytical skills, coding skills, being able to work with technology and understand how it's integrated and how it kind of maps into all different other processes that are connected to it, is really relevant. And actually earlier today, Klinder, you hosted a breakfast roundtable. And one of the kind of insights I took away and comments from one of the attendees was they spoke about when you are a scaling organization and you're entering new jurisdictions or you're offering new products, actually that is what fraudsters are keeping their eye on. They know that it's a new entrant into a new market. And as Klinder was talking about the high volume of false positive alerts, the chances are you're going to miss things, and how fraudsters are so intelligent. They know this. So I think it's understanding where your weak links are and existing controls, having business-wide risk assessments that are not done as traditionally has been done at once a year point in time, but actually almost near real-time business-wide risk assessments where you're actually assessing the adequacy of your controls. If rules are not working, then of course you need to look into switching them off or changing them and changing thresholds. But that decision-making requires people who understand how the tech works and how it's causing issues, creating more risks, or how it's actually working effectively.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything you've said. And I think to add to that, I see almost like two ends of the spectrum and obviously everything in between. And one end of the spectrum is the firms who kind of just bolt on rules one after the other and ends up with hundreds of rules. I was speaking to a bank last week who mentioned that they've got about 900 fraud and AML rules coded into their system. And they've probably only got about 13 to 15 of those that are actually ever firing. And what they've not had the bandwidth to do, because they're scaling up, because they're evolving, because they're launching new products, because X, Y, Z, they've not had the bandwidth to really sit down and go, right, those 13 to 15 that are firing, why are they firing all the time? In terms of the 880 odd ones that aren't firing, why not? Should they be? Are we missing anything? And actually, what is the right number? There may be 900 rules in place, but actually, are they all covering typologies and behaviors that are no longer applicable to the firm, given that it has been rapidly changing and evolving? So that's kind of the one end of the scale that I see in terms of a bit of a myriad of transaction monitoring rules that are completely unmanageable and pretty unruly. And then I kind of see the other end of the spectrum, where firms will almost have a cottage industry of tuning and calibration. And whilst that's wonderful, it's very complex and very sort of overburdensome. And actually, things are changing almost too rapidly that nobody's quite sure what's going on and why it's happening and when it's happening. And there's almost like a whole team dedicated to that, which is great, but not really the reality for a lot of firms who just don't have the capability to hire lots of bums on seats. And so for me, there's a real opportunity here to be learning sort of self-learning, machine learning systems that can be a real cornerstone in enabling us to move from that sort of static rule set or overworked rule set to a model where it's able to self-update based on data, based on trends, based on its own analytics and what we feed into it, and its sort of its own cognitive understanding, so that they can sort of dynamically profile entities and compare expected behavior with actual, which then hopefully will give rise to more fruitful alerts coming out the back end of that.
Yeah, and that's like the gold standard, and it's great. Like you raised the point around data as well, and one thing I'll add around data is, as we're scaling and moving, fintechs is particularly have vast amounts of data. Like you have your customer CDD data, you have your transactional data, but then there's also so much payments data that comes through. If you think about the data that feeds into transaction monitoring systems, the different payment messages, if you think of ISO 20022 versus SWIFT messages, there's so much data there that needs to be structured, that needs to be clean data. And firms, I think, are really understanding the need to have data integrity and data governance in place to ensure that, of course, the tools that you're using are then using accurate and complete data, because that can also result in a lot of false positives and a lot of noise that even the best kind of world-class solution, it cannot mitigate the risk of bad data, and, results are going to be skewed.
You put in trash, you get out trash.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Exactly. I also think about companies who are working or expanding to new regions, so there are different regulations in place. It's very hard to, adapt fast if you already have a set of rules that you need to implement manually and you need to analyze all the cases manually. Like it's a burden, and compliance shouldn't be a burden, right? And I think when you stick to static rules instead of understanding the landscape and understanding the scenario of like new customer profiles, new ICPs, new regions, new regulations, we got to talk about AI, right? I think this is one of the purposes of our discussion right today. And I want to introduce the topic of how AI agents can help in that, repetitive tasks. And for those who are not yet familiar with how AI agents can help with compliance, we're talking about like a system, let's say, that can be implemented to your day-to-day tasks, right? So in compliance, we always have some repetitive tasks that we need to do. There are also some complex analysis that needs to be done in the background, right? So we are constantly looking at cases, to deep dive into the details, to make sure like and to like manually approve them or not, right? That's it. And why not to implement AI to help us with that? And that's what I want to discuss with you. Like, what are your thoughts about it and the potential benefits? Let's start with you, Alia, right now.
Yeah. So I mean, the way forward is AI agents, and when I use the term AI agents, I'm specifically talking about automations. So not necessarily machine learning or behavioral analytics, but just automations of the manual tasks that an analyst would do, which is highly structured in terms of the decisioning based on the data that's fed through to it. So training the bots. I was just looking at the comments, and Luca, one of our attendees, he's met he or she, sorry, but yeah, they have mentioned that quality of decisions is always about data governance. So, if you're the governed speed wins. And I really agree with that. When it comes to even using AI automations and agents, the data needs to be really accurate. There needs to be strong data governance in an organization. And I think a lot of firms who are getting really excited about AI, and you have senior leaders and management wanting to show that AI is being utilized, they often forget what AI is, but what it also demands. It demands model methodologies. It demands strong governance around it. But going back to your point, because I kind of went onto a tangent, and I'm sure we'll discuss those points later. AI agents and not using it, I think, should be criminal. I don't see why analysts should spend all this time going through false positive alerts or just going through messy data, things that can be easily automated with an AI agent. And I think it's very important to also stress that I don't think we'll ever be right now at a space or in the next 5 years where AI agents are going to take over by mass the roles of an analyst. I think what it will do is ensure that those analysts can actually use their minds and their brains and their analytical thinking to actually really focus on those high risk cases and cases that do require investigations, working with multiple stakeholders and also financial intelligence units, and report that suspicious activity as opposed to doing what the machine could do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I'm sorry, Clarinda. I just want to add to that because I was going to comment the same thing. Like, many people make the mistake of like thinking that AI will replace their jobs, and that's definitely not the case, right? It's a force multiplier, right? It can help you, make decisions in minutes instead of days, right? So when you're analyzing different and complex cases, if you're doing manually, you also have the human aspect of it where we're human, we make mistakes. If I'm swamped with low risk profiles, with false positives, I have higher chances of making mistakes on a daily basis, right? So we're talking about AI as a complement to our manual tasks and like replacing some repetitive tasks for ourselves so we can actually focus on high risk individuals and high risk cases, and AI will help us make decisions. That's pretty much it. That's my thoughts about it. But you also have some insights here, Clarinda.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more with everything that's already been said, and just wanted to add a few, I guess, extra points to hopefully complement those. And actually, I want to go back actually to a conversation that was held this morning, and Ali has already kindly mentioned the breakfast session that I hosted over here in London, which was aimed at sort of scaling payments firms. And we were talking about all sorts of financial crime related challenges. And one of the questions that we posed to the room, and there were sort of 15 to 20 practitioners in the room, was, do you see yourselves in your financial crime role as being a sort of enabler to new business, or as a sort of roadblock and gatekeeper? And it was really interesting because the whole room very quickly said enabler. And the whole room also agreed that not only do they see themselves in their role and function as that, but actually the businesses that they sit in also see them in that way. And that's fantastic. But they all agreed that to further put them forward and enable them to be an enabler one of the things that's vital is harnessing technology. And in particular to bring efficiencies, to ultimately reduce risk, and actually to move towards that end goal of ultimately enhancing revenues and profits for the company, right? So it's a synergistic cycle in terms of using these technologies and AI. And I completely agree with Alia in terms of, I think those who are not using AI at all, very much behind the curve, and very much missing out. And I think we often think of technology as having to be this big bang silver bullet that solves everything, and actually it doesn't always need to be that way. It's really important that your technological solution meets your use case and ultimately gives the intended outcomes that you're trying to solve for. So some really good examples that we've seen in the work we do at Beyond FS is things like using tech to do Google searching for adverse media hits, or reviewing documents and extracting key information, or web scraping for particular pieces of beneficial owner information that are publicly available, manually inputting data into systems. Alia, you mentioned a really good example earlier about optimizing the SAR filing process. So these technological advances and implementations don't necessarily need to be all singing and all dancing and the most sophisticated, savvy, sort of sexy solution everybody's ever seen. But these small initiatives, when they compound together, really do make a big difference. And I just wanted to finish my sort of section here by actually using a bit of a real world example of a particularly big global insurance company that me and my firm were helping in terms of their FinCrime technology solution. And at the time before we started, they had, for customer name screening, they had a 95% false positive rate. And that in real terms meant that they generated 2 million alerts per year, which obviously needed to be worked manually by people. And they had a massive team out in a low-cost jurisdiction who were combing through each of those one by one, case by case, and that introduced all the problems that we've already spoken about. For them, just by introducing some really simple technological tools, things like optical character recognition and automation, simple things, augmenting that with a little bit of an AI overlay, it managed to reduce hundreds of thousands of hours of effort that were going into the system annually. And that didn't mean that people were all being fired left, right, and center. It meant that individuals were actually able to turn their focus and their human brains to tasks that required a higher level of thinking and required professional judgment and required a bit more creativity and thinking outside of the box. So to the points already made in the last couple of minutes, it's an additional tool in your arsenal and an addition to your compliance agenda rather than a replacement from your job.
That's awesome. Yeah, I also like to think about the business perspective, so if you zoom out from compliance and you think about like the business itself as a whole, we are always trying to reduce friction with our clients, with our potential clients, right? Because this, at the end of the day, this affects revenue, bottom line, right? So when a customer tries to onboard in our platform, let's say, and it takes 3 days, 4 days, or it's a false positive, like that person has no issues at all, and it gets blocked by for any reason, that person will go directly to your competitor. That's it. So we also got to take this into consideration, right? We are trying to scale our business while reducing friction with our clients and complying with regulations. And I think nowadays AI is playing a big role in helping us do that. But because AI solutions can also be auditable, it helps you focus on high risk cases, as we already discussed. And I think it also helps companies expand faster, right? Because since we are not talking about a static set of rules, but we are talking about machine learning, we're talking about like an adaptive tool. I think that can be very easy with AI as well. We see companies expanding their set of rules, like AI-based set of rules, to a different region in like with a click or two. Right? That's how simple it is, and I think there's still many people who think this is a very complex thing to do. Like it can be a little bit tricky or a little bit, I would not use the word tricky, but I would say a little bit complex to do it first time, because you need to provide data to your AI tool so it can learn how you want to make decisions, but I think this is it. Like it's the first time, and you would have to do it anyway if you're doing it manually, so that's it.
Kyle, can I jump in there? Because I've noticed one of our questions from Armin. Sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. Great question. Asked around handling privacy and also handling hallucinations and bad decisioning. Privacy we can possibly come on to in a second, but I actually think that second question around handling hallucinations and bad decisioning sort of leans into what you were just saying. And for me, it's very much that point around AI is not a silver bullet. It's not a case of you can just plug in some AI, leave it, kick your feet up on your desk and think, great, my job's done for the day, I'll relax now. There's a lot that goes into implementing a technological solution. And that requires a lot of good data and making sure data quality and data integrity is there, to the points that Alia was making a little bit earlier today on this webinar. But there's also a lot of testing and calibration that goes into it. It's a very iterative and evolutionary process. It's certainly not static. And that, for me, requires a really interesting skill set sort of conjunction between your compliance teams, your tech teams, your product teams, and your senior leadership, to make sure that everyone is bought into that journey, and it's not a case of plug and play. We come back to that old phrase of Rome wasn't built in a day. Similar with AI. I think in terms of hallucinations and bad decisioning as well, the final point I wanted to make, and I'm sure the others on this call will have perspectives as well, is that, like with any tool, it's really important that we take this from sort of black box to glass box, in terms of being able to justify and rationalize why decisions are being taken. And a lot of that is going to be to do with the data that you put into the models that you're using, and the tuning and optimization that you embed into it. And so for me, it's a big part is ensuring that your systems are defensible and that you are able to understand what's going into the system, how the system is working, and what's being spat out the other side. So that's defensible internally to senior management, externally to maybe your auditors, and particularly to your regulators. Kayo, Alia, I'm sure you have thoughts on that point as well.
Yeah, I agree with everything you've said. I think it's really also important. Like you said, everyone needs to be singing from the same hymn sheet. Your compliance, your operational first line teams, your tech teams, the data teams. But also I think it's really important to work closely with the vendor or the tech solution provider that you are getting your technology from, if it's not being built in-house. Because a lot of the kind of governance required to ensure that a model is not hallucinating does come back to the model methodology. What is the model being trained on? But also the iterative validations that need to be done internally within the firm that's implementing the tech to ensure that the decisioning and the rationale is correct. So going back to your point, Klunda, it's not a silver bullet. And I think sometimes a lot of people do think it's a silver bullet, but the right-minded firms that have implemented AI correctly, and whenever I have implemented AI, it's really having all the stakeholders understand that this is an implementation, integration, validation, and kind of a check at the end. It's not out of the box, plug and play, like you said, and then you leave it. It's going to become a headless tool, and essentially it will start to hallucinate. But even kind of use cases where machine learning and large language models are being used to screen or scrape public source data for adverse media or any other kind of customer due diligence checks, that can also, I wouldn't say hallucinate, but can give you the wrong results, because not all machine learning models or LLMs are designed to understand context. So ensuring that contextualization, the behavioral analysis is taking place is super important. When firms build it in-house, that responsibility falls on the firm itself to have really good model governance in place, committees, toll gates to sign off when kind of, automations in AI can be used widely within an organization or different jurisdictions from privacy matters. But also, if you are working with a vendor or a tech provider, I think it's sometimes we don't utilize the skill set that exists internally on the tech side with these solution providers, because they know how it's being built. It's up for them to also share with firms what that model governance looks like. How do they continually check to ensure that the data you feed them is remaining accurate, is being stored correctly, but then also the model or the tool that's being used is having a feedback loop from analysts and frontline teams that are actually making decisions off the back of it whilst it's being validated.
Awesome. Yeah, and I also think like these tech companies also have their own regulations, right? So they gotta handle data in a safe way. They gotta comply with these regulations. So I don't see that as an issue. But also, if you're outsourcing this tech from a third-party provider, it's not 100% AI, right? We're using AI to support and to make these processes better, but it's not 100% AI. So in these cases, as you guys mentioned, like, of course, it needs to be set up and it needs to be very well integrated with product, with tech, with compliance, with all the departments, and so you can understand and you can apply the set of rules that you want for your business. But it's not 100% AI. Well, we're companies using AI as like to support you, but it works alongside with our own technology. So you don't have to actually deal with hallucinations in that cases. At least this is my experience. I don't know if you guys have any different experiences from this, but I've never had any types of hallucinations. And I would say like there are cases where we are able to reduce around 90% of false positives by simply integrating AI. So I think it's like, of course, not everything will be perfect. Not all solutions out there will be perfect. But like, if someone can reduce false positives by 100%, like, give that person or that company a trophy, because it's not like this. But if you can reduce, for example, Clarinda gave us an example of like receiving 2 million alerts. That's huge, right? It's overwhelming to any compliance team. So if you can reduce 90% of this number, like, this is already a huge win for AI.
Absolutely. I'm always a bit like wary when tech providers or third parties talk about out of the box plug and play, especially when it comes to AI or large language models. And so on one of these demos, they were demoing kind of like this automated onboarding flow, which was fantastic, but it also did an adverse media AI driven kind of screen of Google and all public source. And all the information being provided was clearly, it wasn't contextualized, and it was the same name but a different individual, and it hadn't been picked up by the company and the people we were speaking to, which really concerned me. So that's the only situation where I have actually seen AI give actually really wrong results. And I guess if that hadn't been picked up and the solution was implemented, then we would have had significant kind of issues going forward. But Keo, like you said, when it comes to companies that are actually kind of they've got models that they've built themselves, and integrating with existing tech stacks within a firm. They are highly regulated themselves, and they have responsibilities on them as well when it comes to the data, and also how models are functioning, how they're explainable, how they're being tested regularly, and ensuring that there are no hallucinations happening.
Awesome.
I completely agree. I was just taking a look while you were both speaking at one of the questions, and one of them's really jumped out at me. And I'm hoping, Alia, maybe you can give some thoughts on this too. And I only say this because I know we were talking about it this morning. I'm certainly not trying to throw you under a bus. In terms of which parts of the AML processes benefits most from AI and automation best practices. Is it just false positives? I think it's really important to note that obviously the sort of agenda for this session was revolved around eliminating false positives. However, that is not the totality of where there's use cases for AI, automation, technology, innovation. There's opportunity in broad spectrums in the financial crime space. And Alia, maybe you can talk to the SAR example that we were talking through this morning. The only thing I want to say before you do is that for me, it's absolutely critical to define your use case. The amount of clients and prospective clients that I speak to who sort of go, I'm getting pressure from senior management and leadership and the board to implement AI. And we kind of go, great, what do you want to do with it? And they go, I want to implement AI. we kind of go, to do what? To solve what problem? What outcomes are you hoping to achieve? And they haven't really done that thinking yet, in terms of they just want to implement the new shiny thing, which, don't get me wrong, is good, that culturally they're at a point where they want to jump on board. But it's really critical to understand what your problem is, what the use case is, and what good looks like, what are the intended outcomes, so that you can tailor and implement a solution that is realistic towards that and is actually helping you strive towards reaching that goal. Otherwise, you're just shooting in the dark. And I think, Alia, maybe your SAR example is a really good opportunity to sort of talk through how that works in practice using a real life example, if you're happy to.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So the suspicious activity reporting is, if you think about the customer life cycle, after you're onboarding, you're, dealing with the customer, doing ongoing monitoring, you're then going to think, okay, something's suspicious and we need to report it. And one of the, and this, I do caveat this with it, depending on how well configured your rules are from a transaction monitoring perspective and from a screening perspective. So I'm assuming here all the rules are configured correctly and they're performing correctly. Then the SAR automation can come in, it can really add value when it comes to writing out that narrative, being able to have all the transactions that have been identified as suspicious, all the CDD information on your customer auto-generated within a template or a format that is either for your internal suspicious activity reporting or for the external reporting. To then escalate that to the second line. I think where the automation, where the judgment happens and the kind of investigation happens, that would be a second line decision. That's where you would use your human brain and you would analyze. But the kind of first line, through the systems you have for onboarding and transaction monitoring, being able to auto-generate internal suspicious activity alerts is super useful. It also creates consistency when these reports come through to the second line. To create these automations, however, you need to have really strong guidelines in terms of what is suspicious for your firm, what is suspicious enough for that threshold for an internal suspicious activity report, what CDD information is suspicious based on the risk of your customer. And then again, if you've configured your transaction monitoring system in a risk-based approach, looking at specific customer profile risk types or geographical risk types or the product risk types, then you'll already be aware of, if an alert's being generated, what is that alert indicating in terms of suspicion. So the narrative around what, why, who, when you report suspicious activity can really easily be kind of translated and automated. Other use cases are false positives when it comes to automations. Very kind of simply being able to close off known false positives, whether it's from sanction screening or PEP, politically exposed people screening, and then also from a transaction monitoring perspective. But I would be very wary personally on implementing such automations until my tools were risk-based and configured as such. I'd want my high, medium, and low customers to have very different rule sets. If I'm looking at businesses, different types of business types based on their geographies, based on what type of payments they're making, having rules configured accordingly to then have the automations to know what is a true false positive. One of the easiest kind of use cases was where we had standard out of the box rules that were alerting on customers that it was not suspicious activity for a specific customer type, but because the rules were not risk based, it was just simple enough to create those automations. When I implemented it, we built that in-house, that feasibility to do that. But I know a lot of tech solutions provide that in terms of muting of alerts or kind of like auto alert resolutions. But what concerns me about those features is that they don't have the rationale sometimes linked to the alert. Some of the best solutions I've seen out there and providers, they will auto close or mute an alert, but there will be auto generated rationale as to why something is a false positive. And it goes back to Keo, how you mentioned, and Clarinda, you as well, the defensibility of AI and the decision making.
Absolutely, yeah. Guys, we need to move forward. I would like to read the chat a little bit. I saw there's a lot of people here from Luxembourg, from Panama, from Montreal, Nigeria, Egypt, Trinidad and Tobago, Zambia, another user from Panama, Netherlands, Ethiopia. Thank you so much, guys, for joining this. Lunga, you asked if hello from South Africa. That's nice. Is the session recorded? Yes, we are recording this session, and it will be shared with you later after this call, right? Guys, I would like to wrap this up, this discussion. I know we could be sitting here talking for hours, but but how do you see the future of compliance with AI, like in intelligence automation?
Can I jump in there first? I think, and it's a massive opportunity, right? There's no doubt about it in my mind. But I do want to come back, and I don't want to sound like a broken record, but kind of coming back to a statement which I think I've made earlier, which is it is not a silver bullet. It's not something that can just be switched on and then we all go home and kick our feet up. There need to be appropriate guardrails in place. I know we've already spoken on this call about making sure that things like biases and hallucinations are monitored for and then picked up on and eliminated to the extent possible. And where they remain, actually being able to justify why these have been sort of risk accepted. So for me, it's a balance. I think certainly it has a lot of potential, but we've also got to be very cognizant that there are limitations and there are going to be further evolutions. And we need to sort of take a risk-based approach and a pragmatic approach when it comes to implementing tech solutions.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm going to echo what you said, Clarinda, about pragmatism. I think it's really important to be pragmatic about what those use cases are and what can be achieved by AI, and what are the quick wins and the low-hanging fruits that can be kind of plug-and-play automations. I don't see a future where AI, machine learning is not being used in every financial institution. I mean, it's going to happen, but I think what's really important is that it's being used responsibly and in the right way.
Absolutely, yeah. And as I mentioned, right, and as you guys also mentioned, like there's not a world in the future without AI, right? So we are using AI in different areas. Like when we're talking about compliance specifically, we're using AI not only to AML, like to use for AML screening, but also in different areas, different tasks, right? So it can be during the KYC process, the entire KYC process, let's say, the user is using AI, like is using our technology with AI throughout the entire process without even noticing. So we are using it to streamline the processes, to make better decisions, faster decisions, as I mentioned. Like, this is crucial, but you cannot be just fast in your decisions and make, bad decisions. So you gotta have that balance. Like, I want to scale my company fast, but I also need to be safe while doing it. And AI plays a big role in that. So that's what I think. Guys, I don't know if you guys want to share anything else. If there's any other topic that you want to discuss. I saw that we just got a question from Sahar. Thank you for the insightful session. How do you see AI-driven AML adapting to cross-border freight and trade compliance risks? Do you have any thoughts and insights about that, Clarinda and Elia?
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna assume that Sahar means the traditional kind of shipping, trade, finance space. When she's speaking about cross-border freight, I think there's such great use cases for AI-driven AML in that space, because it's all very document heavy, unless you're with a firm that's tokenizing all the kind of shipping documents. You have bills of lading, you have documents that are showing actually what are the goods on the ship, what information about a vessel, being able to track a vessel because you need to see what ports it's going to, and you also then need to ensure that the goods are, and the price of the goods are what the market price is. So all of that information and that intelligence, when I used to work in the trade finance space back in the day, that was all very manual. There's manual research. You kind of go online, you'd see, what the market value is for cement, for instance. And then you'd monitor and track the vessel's route. Obviously, you'd screen the vessel as well. And all of these steps can be automated because a lot of the information is on the public domain. It is available. And they're also great solution providers within this space. And then firms using the tokenization process for payments and all the shipping transactional documents. It's even, they've got the data to hand.
Yeah, I don't have anything sort of over and above to add to what Alia said, but I'm certainly seeing examples of using more things like automation to do those pulling and extracting tasks. In the trade and shipping world, as Alia mentioned, there's a lot of documents involved, but in a lot of cases, those documents follow somewhat of a standardized structure and a standardized format and similar fields. And so being able to use technology to do almost a first pass of those documents, even just to populate certain elements of due diligence, etc., then enabling the human professional brain to then come in and make those risk-based decisions. For me, that's certainly a starter for 10. That's not me saying I don't think there's further potential for it, but at least a sort of starting point as to where I see immediate benefits of using technology and automation.
Awesome. Do you guys have any other insights that you want to share, or any thoughts on how a good AI looks like in AML, like in terms of efficiency? Do you have any insights to wrap up the session?
Yeah, I think like first it needs an owner. Someone needs to own the AI, the tech. That's where the accountability comes in, and that's where the governance of it comes in. You need to have clean data, so the data quality, the data integrity point, validation. So whenever anything new is being implemented, a good period of time where you are monitoring it, you're testing it, and you're validating it, and that's all manual. That's not something that should necessarily be automated. And then, is it explainable and is it auditable? I think those are the kind of key points to always keep in mind. The ownership of the AI, I think, is super critical within firms, especially if a firm is going to build it themselves.
That's a great point, Elia. Yeah, Clarinda, do you have any thoughts about it?
Yeah, I agree in terms of, I think for me, the defensible point is really critical. It shouldn't just be a case of, great, we found this new thing that's sparkly and shiny and now it's his fault kind of thing. We wouldn't do that with humans, and we certainly shouldn't do that with AI. So being able to understand it, I think in terms of what good looks like in terms of AI, I think for me it is that point around intended outcomes and being specific and dedicated towards the purpose it's meant to do. There will be AI solutions, and there are AI solutions out there that are a bit more all-encompassing and multifaceted, but equally there are very specific solutions and technologies that can be implemented for very specific nuanced bespoke use cases. And so for me, it's kind of what good looks like ultimately is a firm who has a suite of technology in place that features multiple types of technological solutions. So things like automation, things like AI, other types of technological advances that actually fulfills the intended purpose, rather than kind of just going, oh, well, we picked one because it sounded nice, and now we've implemented and we're just kind of hoping and praying on our coattails that it works.
I think, like, I just noted on the comments, there's a LinkedIn user, so there's no name, but they made a really good point about how AI systems are ultimately designed by humans. So as a result, there's inherent human limitations, and that's why they're a bit kind of concerned about leveraging AI. And I really do agree with that. This person speaking of model bias, and that's a big issue when you think of the onboarding CDD side of things, screening, automations where certain names and so with links to certain jurisdictions will auto flag sometimes as a true positive. So for me, the AI that's not validated and ensure that there's no bias involved in the decision making is important, because what can happen is a financial exclusion, which a lot of myself included, I have faced when I'm kind of doing an automated fintech onboarding flow, and because of my name or even a date of birth, I just get rejected. And it goes back to the data that's being used, because if you're just screening someone on a first name, last name, and a date of birth, but without any kind of jurisdictional data, while you're going to be kind of treating a lot of people as true positives, that becomes the decisioning of the model, which is a bias then in place, plus bad incomplete data, and essentially poor decisions will be made that could exclude people. So I just spoke of it from the exclusion aspect and the risks of AI.
No, that's great. That's great. Yeah, I think it's a great statement for us to wrap up the session. To finish, we already have to close the session, but I want to thank everyone. We saw people here from around the globe, and I want to thank you, Clarinda and Elia. You guys are amazing, and I hope the chat and like all our attendees loved the session as well. I think it was very insightful. And yeah, if you want to say any final words, please feel free to do it.
Just a thank you from me, and Kaya, thank you for hosting and being such a wonderful chair for this session. It's great to see so many people from such different geographies. It's also wonderful to get questions and to get us all thinking and solutionizing out loud. So thanks so much, everyone, for taking the time. Really appreciate you having me here, and look forward to connecting further in the future.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining.
Thank you so much, everyone.